Now, analysts do warn that Russia's decision to pull out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative may have significant negative effects on grain and fertilizer users here in Africa. An end to the deal may end up pushing grain prices higher, and it will further strain farmers and cash-strapped aid organizations, which right now are struggling to respond to challenges in a continent where nearly 80% of people can't afford a healthy diet in 2021. Earlier on, I spoke to the Managing Director of the Africa Food Systems Forum, Amath Sene. I started by asking him what the grain supply situation for African countries would look like in 2023 and beyond.
The good news is yesterday, I think Russia has announced more than around 50,000 tons to be channeled to 6 African countries, including those in the Sahel. So it compensates currently the issue. But at the end of the day, it shows also the vulnerability of the economy of African countries that depend largely on imports. The African Development Bank estimates that economies in Africa, our import bill is around more than $70 billion a year, which is huge. And it contrasts with a continent that have more than 60% of the arable land, a vibrant young population. So a lot of ecosystem that can provide the solution.
And we'll get to the question around, boosting domestic productivity in just a moment. But I want to get back to the global context as well, because what we're seeing at the moment is that we've got fairly decent harvests in other wheat producers, the Canadians, the Americans, bits of continental Europe. If you look at the chart for wheat futures, for example, in Chicago, it's actually just been coming down fairly steadily this year. So would we be in a position to say at least some of that pressure, the price pressure that households faced last year, it's not something they will be facing again in 2023, but that gives us a bit of breathing room to then focus and ask ourselves, okay, what do we do to boost wheat supplies in Africa from 2024 onwards?
So from 2024 almost, I think there is a combination of many things. First, production this year, particularly for those countries which have just started their rainy season and producing. But on top of that, there may be additional investment to adapt, not only following the rainfall season, but also producing throughout the year with new techniques of production, new practices, climate smart agriculture, and also value addition.
Looking at the context of all the products that come out of that Russia, Ukraine, Black Sea area, wheat, maize, the cereals get a lot of attention, but not the fertilizers. And Russia is, I believe, the second largest fertilizer producer on the planet. Can you give us a sense of how fertilizer exports were essentially affected by the decision by the Russians to essentially say, yeah, we're pulling out of the Black Sea grain deal? Because that inevitably would have ripple effects down the line on the productivity issues that you mentioned. If farmers in Senegal, in Nigeria, in Egypt, if they don't have access to affordable fertilizer, their yields are essentially just going to remain where they are.
So fertilizer is a key input in terms of agriculture productivity and production. So it's essential, and then it has to be obviously in terms of sustainable production within the north. And currently, we need to reimagine the industry. So when you have a crisis, it's also an opportunity. And today on the continent, you have OCP, which is from Morocco, that was also one of the biggest producer of phosphate, Morocco, the largest one in the world. So there are alternatives. We have also Nigeria, you have Kenya, and many other countries that are coming in to revitalize their industry.
What needs to happen to make sure that we have much better fertilizer production at scale within some of the countries in which we're already doing it? You mentioned Morocco, you mentioned Nigeria, especially the Dangote refinery coming up. That might help to essentially boost production. Is it a lack of capital that we need to invest in these facilities? Is it the feedstock that we don't have? What's a bottleneck?
I think it's at many levels. So number one is the political will. So far it has been mainly import, because policies have been designed also to import. And there is a lot of also interest around it, where things are coming from outside, and then it worked like that for many years. So I think many countries have been also reviewing their national policy, sector policy on agricultural production, but also on agro-industry. And now building those industries is part of the national sector plan, which is key. and which is a good thing. So that's one. And many countries that have the capacity to do and produce, it has to be integrated into the national plan, and then those industries happening. Number two is public and private partnership. When you have those ones, so you provide the incentive for the industry to grow quickly, with also private sectors coming in and working with also local one, particularly when you have like the raw material for the case of phosphate in Morocco. By the way, Morocco is currently developing well and has a lot of representation across the continent, and they are currently supplying and feeding that gap. And third is now, you know, the partnership between the different countries. So looking at it from a intra-continental trade, and removing those kind of barriers that limit also, you know, the export-import between the different countries.